before we get to see more of that, we have to start at the beginning. I'm going to divide this video into two parts. I'm going to start by talking about my gas bike project, then I will talk about my Vega, which is by far the bigger project of the two. I determined I was going to build a gas bike to start off my IDS project. I needed a bike within my budget of $60. I found this classic rally cycle, which I came to know as the Vietnam bike, as it was built during the Vietnam War. It needed a lot of work, and so a lot of unrecorded hours later, we went from this to this. My first challenge came within the first few days of working. I had already built my engine block and was doing a test fit when I noticed that my pedals could not make a full rotation. There is no way for me to get around this challenge, as I could not put on custom pedals over the old proprietary crankset bolt. I overcame this challenge by switching to my father's slightly less old bike. Once I got off the Vietnam bike and onto the decent bike, it started coming together rather quickly. It took many hours, so here's a quick flip through of the pictures so you can see it get done. I ran into another challenge once I had the bike pretty much built. I was not getting enough fuel through the lines to run the engine. It took a lot of troubleshooting to determine the problem, but eventually I learned that if I created a seal on the gas tank with my mouth and blew out really hard to create a pressure vacuum, that pressure forced gas through the lines, which in turn filled the fuel filter up enough so that the intake pressure from the camshaft could pull in remaining and extra gas through the lines without me having to prime it anymore. I learned later that this is called priming a gas system, and I'll have to do it anytime I pull the stopcock. After learning and growing from this challenge, it was just some carburetor tuning for the 16:1 break-in mixture and waiting for the carb to set. At the beginning, the bike was making more noise than speed. But later, I was actually getting some decent speed and power as everything started to set. And in case you wanted to see the gas bike more in depth, here's a quick run of B-roll. Now that I've covered the journey of building my gas bike, although I wrote way more in my learning journey, we now get back to the Vega. The Vega has been a running joke in my family my whole life. It was my father's first car, which he bought only because his father would not let him borrow the family car that he needed to carry his accordion to play at his best friend's wedding. Most of my life, the Vega has not been in running order, and for the small amount of my life that it has been, there has always been problems with it. Whether it be a slipping clutch or a brake catching fire, there is always something. I sought out to change this, but first I had to get it running. As I was not expecting this to be a live presentation, I only took pictures and no real videos until we got it running. But I'm going to give a quick run through on everything that I did to it. I started by installing new spark plug wires and a new coil. I cranked the engine and still no start. After that I decided to start working on the distributor, as I was still getting no spark. It turned out the distributor was full of water almost all the way up to the breaker points. This was bad, and it took me a couple hours to remove the water. I was in such shock that I didn't even bother taking pictures of it, which is unfortunate. I still got no crank after all this, so I was back to the drawing board. I had three theories. Number one was broken wires, as they were extremely old and weathered. Many hours later of tracing every single wire according to a wiring diagram I found on the internet, and there were no breaks, which was quite surprising. My second theory was a bad ground, which, after testing, was also wrong. I ended up going to one of my 3 shop manuals and found an 8-step ignition test. I completed the steps and finally had a solid answer. Replace breaker points, capacitor, condenser. 2 months later, and my father and I located all 3 of those parts. It took a while because it's kind of hard finding parts for a 46-year-old car that is known as one of the worst cars ever made. After a couple hours of installing them, we got this. After this, I ran it daily for a few weeks just to make everything set and to burn out the gunk in the engine. I put on a few little neat things that are way too technologically advanced for the car, like this. Well, that's the story of my Vega and my IDS, albeit very shortened. I did some other small projects and gave all my family's small engines a tune-up. My IDS in person was going to be way cooler, but I made do. Enjoy the other presentation, and see ya!